Are you going to introduce us? You should introduce us.
I should introduce you. Hold on a second. Make it full screen. Okay, I'm introducing you. Hey, everybody, it's Joe, and that's Michelle, and that's Ty. Go.
So Ty is my sidekick today. She's employee number 1 with Lean RAQA, and we are going to share with you some of our horror stories about pre-market approval and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, and how you can avoid having your own terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day.
Even the day before Halloween.
Yeah.
Full moon. First time since 1944. Please continue.
So Ty is a biomedical engineer by training. And then I mentored her in her first job out of college. So she, though she's an engineer, she's been trained in the fine arts of RAQA, and now she is a grief counselor in training alongside me. So this is my executive team, my chief entertainment officer, my chief fun officer, and my chief therapy officer. So today we're going to talk about the stages of regulatory grief that lead to the terrible, horrible, no good day in your pre-market submission. So we're going to begin our journey with denial, which is a poor pre-market strategy. So as an investor, that's all you really need is a company has a great pitch, financial projections look great, and the device concept makes sense, and the company is confident in their RA strategy. So, right? No, it's wrong. It's very, very wrong. And why? We typically see clients doing their own regulatory research and strategy and putting that in their pitch, not asking for enough time, not asking for enough money, not understanding the right pathway even for their product. So, Ty?
Yeah. So a good example that we've seen of this is people not identifying the right product code. And so they build their entire investor pitch under the wrong product code. So take surgical masks. Everyone's into them right now. They're the hot thing. And there is a product code for a normal surgical mask, FXX, but there's a different one for antimicrobials. And so we see people who have antimicrobial masks trying to use this FXX product code and the guidance documents associated with it, and the scope of what their testing is astronomically different. So you just ask them what they're going to do, and they're going to do the 5 normal tests, and then you're like, oh, but you have an antimicrobial, and that's a $300,000 testing suite back when they cleared them. So it's something that's easily poked at in an investor pitch because they're not doing the research right, because they don't understand what they're looking for or the extent of what they're looking at.
So, and it's easy to do because, like she said, if you're even just doing a pitch about a mask, there are 24 different product codes that you could use or misuse according to your product features. So the next common error that we see in pitches is asking when to get regulatory involved, and it's too little too late. A lot of people come to us and they just say, we need it now. They think that they have done all the precursor work, and they're like, hey, Michelle, we just need a submission. But they haven't really done a proper regulatory strategy. They don't understand where they're at in product development. As a result, their testing strategy, their budget, and their timeline are off. And that they have prototyped and tested to either not enough standards or the wrong standards. They don't have what I call the pre-QMS, where you have enough design controls to generate the documentation you need in a submission. And they also haven't done a production equivalent run, which is something that FDA expects to see in your testing.
Yeah, that's a really big point. Is we see a lot of customers do testing on prototypes that are not production equivalent, and you can't use that testing really. You have to go through hoops to make it work. And you can, but
it's a lot of justification to make a comparison between your prototype that you tested and your production equivalent unit, and how, from an engineering perspective, that the testing's still relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So another area that a lot of customers argue is that We don't need a full QMS until after we've received FDA clearance or approval. And while that is technically true, it doesn't make sense to put design controls in retrospectively. We see a lot of after the fact, a review of claims and marketing that can't be supported. And then again, to build all this stuff retrospectively, if you haven't done all these regulatory steps along the bottom, you have to go back and re-engineer your documentation, which takes a lot of time and compromises the quality of the work. So the other common mistake we see in denial is that companies are in love with their own science. And this is important because they make assumptions about, wow, the problem I'm solving is obvious, and it's not. The scope of the problem is obvious. And they also make assumptions, logical assumptions about their science. That part's for free, folks. So I call it the transitive property of math does not apply to your regulatory submission. And that means like A, you know, in your mind, A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. And the FDA does not buy that argument unless you do all the work to prove out each one of those steps. Another common mistake we see is that inventor is the CEO, but the CEO needs to be a business person, and most inventors are not. And so that's going to also create this being in love with your own science and also contribute to this, what you think is a logical argument for your technology. Yep. So Ty, I think you had a good experience here. Or
Yeah.
good, I use the term loosely.
A good experience. I have a lot of stories about this.
A good example, we'll say that.
And I should preface that I spent my career so far in working in startups. So this is near and dear to me because I see it on the other side, not just as a consultant, but when I was an employee. Hiring is a huge issue in startups. I saw everything under the sun. They would hire the most overpowered executive member that didn't know how to do any of the technical work anymore. And then they would hire like a brand new graduate and never have someone in the middle. And they would think that they were saving money by hiring these new grads and balancing it with these overpowered executive teams, when really what they could have done is bought a really nice mid-level senior and experienced engineer and a mid-level senior experienced RA/QA person and got more bang for their buck because their overhead costs would have been longer. They would have been able to move through things quicker because those people are experienced in new product development. Whereas someone who hasn't done it in 20 years and someone who's never done it, they muddle their way through and it just takes months and months longer than it needs to.
And that CEO, the high-powered CEO from one of the big companies, to run a startup is very, very different from running a division of one of the multi-billion-dollar international organizations.
Sometimes they just don't understand that resource limitation that is a reality as a startup in medical devices.
So another common mistake we see in new technology and submissions is that they want all the things. They want all the features and they want to do it all in one submission. And oftentimes they're combining enough new and novel things to where they're a de novo instead of a 510K. And that's a much bigger leap than taking it stepwise and doing a 510K, maybe a follow-on special 510K or a subsequent 510K, depending on what feature or intended use you're trying to add, and then doing a de novo after all of those steps. And the reason why you might take this approach instead is because it almost like puts blinders on the FDA. So at the first 510K, you introduce enough new and novel things that maybe it challenges their thinking, but at the end of the day, you can still demonstrate that your product doesn't raise any new questions of safety or efficacy. Whereas if you do all the things in de novo, you have to talk about all the features at one time and one by one about how each feature doesn't raise new questions of safety and efficacy. Whereas if you've kind of pared it down and you've already got clearance on the bulk of your technology, and it's only maybe a particular indication or a particular technology, then you don't have to discuss all those other things about how you got to this one thing that you need the de novo for. So what this would look like is that you would do your 510K, your special 510K, and here are the fees to the left, the FDA fees and typical other costs associated. And then you would do the big leap of the de novo. The benefit of starting the 510K process is that you can start marketing and perhaps before a competitor, and you can start getting early market feedback. It's easier to run trials on products that already have market clearance and reduce costs that way. And then you can also see that the fee for the de novos jumps exponentially over 9 times of what it costs to do a 510K. Also, the cost can be, in excess of $500,000 because most de novos require clinical trials of some sort.
Yeah, this is something that's really important to understand your investors here, because I see companies struggle with this approach. They want everything all at once and they think it's absolutely critical. And I had a company that had 2 novel portions that would have immediately put them in a de novo category. And they could have incorporated one of those features, the feature that was more important for tissue collection, probably under a 510K. We would have had to go through the whole pre-sub and make sure we asked and done everything right, but it most likely would have been a 510K. But because they thought that second feature was so important, they would go right for this de novo. But that is so much more capital, and really you have to ask your marketers and have a good market understanding of what's required.
And Ty is well connected in the medical community around town. And when she was talking to some of her clinician colleagues about this particular product, they said about that third feature that the customer said, no, we can't go to market without this. They're like, we wouldn't use that anyways.
Yeah, we wouldn't care about it anyway. And so it's just an interesting disconnect that sometimes people get if they don't talk to the right industry folks and they don't talk to their users. They get so in love with their own science. They're like, we have to have this. And you're like, you don't. You could do it. You could do it later.
If I understand you, you're saying that in your example, the company had a compelling value proposition difference with this thing. And they said, that's why we have to do it all or nothing.
I don't know if I would call it a value proposition, but when they looked at products that were available on the market, they're like, well, there's not a product that does
this
Z. So we need to do Z because there's not a product that does it. And when you ask clinicians, they're like, well, there's not a product that does it because we don't
care.
Okay, well, that's just misreading the customer.
And that's another
bad idea, but
that's another hazard of being in love with the science, is that it blurs your vision about what the FDA expects to see and what your market really wants or needs.
Well, so let's go with an example where there is a need. So let's say, for example, you have computers that don't have a webcam, and everyone has a computer, and I finally figured out how to put a webcam in my computer. What would be the point of doing a 510K for a computer so that I can go to market with a computer that has no brand equity, no nothing relative to the Microsoft brand? So fine, Joe has a computer.
Well,
Until I have the computer with the webcam.
You still get the benefit of introducing a technology that's similar to what's out there to the FDA. So when you give them this huge package, you have to remember their people and their perspective is always safety. It is always safety. It is always the worst case scenario with the FDA. And so if you present something that they're familiar with, that they understand well, then they're more collaborative in a sense when you bring in this additional feature. And you can also start generating revenue once you have it clear. So you just maybe sell a laptop first and get some cash in the bank to do this next big step. Sometimes it's not always.
To Ty's point, maybe your your computer, it does just look like a computer, but there's some infrastructure built in that's going to enable your webcam later.
Okay.
So it's close enough to a computer that's already on the market, but it is a platform you can build on to create that value.
Well, I can, as a sales and marketing person, I can understand the analogy of getting little yeses along the way, because you can just keep nodding, and then when I have the big ask, you're like, now I have muscle memory of going like this.
Right. And if you just take that computer and you take the webcam and you go straight to a de novo, you have to have the entire conversation from the ground up about the computer, about the infrastructure, about the webcam. Whereas if you had the conversation as you went to the FDA, you would, by the time you got to de novo, you're like, we're using this, our own cleared product as the base, and all we're doing is changing an indication for use. All we're doing is adding a algorithm.
This is something that is an always, Michelle's advice, always, always, always do it in steps.
Not always, because everything has to be tailored towards the customer's business and marketing strategies. But this is definitely, I would say probably 85–90% of the time I suggest how to break things down, especially with the digital health spectrum, because that can range wildly in classification. And so it's often easier to maybe build a 510K with what I call a dumb algorithm, not a learning or an AI, and then do the AI itself in the de novo. And then you've already had the conversation about the base product and technology, so that in the de novo, all you're doing is focusing on now we've added an AI to this thing, and now it can be a diagnostic instead of some sort of aid.
Got it. Well, thank you. And I was ready to move on, but the audience will not hear of that. Now there's a question from Dwayne, and here he comes.
Yes, Michelle, what's the difference in time, like between these two, right? Like, if you were to go straight de novo versus kind of stepwising it, like you said, like my question comes from the actual achieving market access perspective, right? So it can be difficult for a client, sometimes with these to the 510K sounds great from a FDA clearance, but actually getting into a market, achieving that regional access can be difficult. I see a lot of companies who get a 510K, they go to sell it, but they weren't different enough. And then, so they spin their wheels, they try to go a little bit farther, they got to go raise some more capital. And then, 5 years later, they don't own any of their company anymore. It's all other investors. So I'm just curious, what's the difference in time here? Are we talking like a year where they can finally build that de novo, or what is it?
So if we just look at FDA clearance times, because you're going to have to do similar testing along the way, the base testing for the product, you're looking at, for a 510K, 90 days is the FDA clock. And I tell clients that they really need to be prepared for about 5 months total, given the additional information request process. And then if you go to a de novo, the FDA clock, I believe, is like 120 days. But if you look at what they're actually averaging, the last time I saw their turnaround numbers, it was 210 days. So even if you're still going to have that marketing, even if you go straight to the de novo, you're still going to have a big gap in being able to sell a product. So this is a way of almost kind of marking time for what you need to do for your ultimate market clearance.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on through our stages of grief. So we just talked about, the denial in our pre-market can often lead to anger in our post-market commercialization. So what that could look like is unsubstantiated claims. Claims must be substantiated with actual data and testing. it is, I recommend that you really study your marketing strategy and you build those claims into your pre-market submission, and you get FDA to clear them as part of your submission package. So claims can take even like making a comparison to a competitor, saying where twice as fast or reduced procedure times. And if you make those types of claims post-market and they're not substantiated, and in some cases that the FDA hasn't reviewed them, that can lead to a warning letter. It can, and this is another thing where I think I see clients making claims based off of that transitive property, thinking it's logical that obviously this would reduce procedure times without doing like an actual study. It can also, depending on what the claims that you're making, can take your product into a different classification, because especially if you're in like a class 1 or a class 2 510K exempt, you could make a claim that takes the product out of the exemption qualification. It could add a new intended use, a new technology. And then you could also receive a warning letter because you exceeded your classification restrictions.
Two comments here. One is from Rob Packard. He just noted that the average for de novo in 2019 was 307 days.
Wow.
And Stacy Dickens writes with 2 exclamation points, yes, reimbursement and coding must be built into the trials with payers buy-in upfront, exclamation point, exclamation point.
And what the payers want to see in terms of clinical data may or may not align with what the FDA wants to see. So you really need to do your homework to get a properly scoped trial that's going to tick all your boxes.
Yes, all caps, exclamation point. She really means it. Peter, you had a comment. And a microphone that is muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi, Michelle and Tianna. My question relates to the use and usefulness of real-world clinical experience in using it for your clearance, for your FDA 510K submission.
That's a good question. I think that's one that even the FDA is trying to figure out right now. They have published in the last few years several guidances on how to use real world evidence, but as of yet, I have not had a client where that was of actual utility in their submission.
When you say so it's not of actual utility, are you meaning that the FDA would not accept it, or it just kind of wasn't useful in the end?
It just wasn't useful in the end. It just wasn't appropriate. Has anybody else had experience on the call that Joe could promote to talk about real world evidence and an experience that you had?
The moment no hands, they'll probably come up, but let's go to the next. Oh, no, I spoke too soon. Ms. Susan Carr is coming on the line. Eventually. There she is.
I did meet with the FDA a couple of last month, and one of their suggestions moving towards a full 510K was human factor studies. I actually have conducted my own human factor studies. We had a Cartech party and rented out a hotel room and invited like 300 healthcare workers to try the current system versus the Cartech system, which I call the frog, filter removal glass. And then we also sent out over 100 discovery questionnaires and user studies. So that's why, but they still require more human factor studies from leaders in the industry to say yay or nay. Now one of the big needle companies that's I've been speaking with did their own market research with positive results. So that's a good thing for Cartech. But yeah, FDA definitely wants to see those studies and non-biased studies. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Susan.
You said it eloquently. Thank you.
Thank you.
carrying on.
Okay. So the other thing is you just need to stop fighting and start developing real evidence. We see people just trying to make a lot of adoptions and justifications rather than just doing the work to prove it. And to Susan's point, you know, not including usability, which is also called human factors. And so anyways, you can see, but this is a typical battle between R&D and quality.
Hey, Michelle, I'm very amused by that little GIF, but why would R&D fight quality?
Again, it's kind of that, you know, R&D is largely made up of engineers that are very math oriented, very linear thinking, and make these logical conclusions that to the FDA, they're not logical conclusions, they're actual leaps. And so they make assumptions that, well, obviously we don't need 60601 testing because we're just software and you should be able to use this with any probe. And the FDA is like, no, we don't want, you have to prove probe by probe what you want. And so you have to prove probe by probe that your software doesn't create any new safety compromises. That's just one example.
Anyone trying the transitive property is violating quality and safety. You can't assume because A equals B equals C, A equals C. You can't do it.
Mm-hmm. And Ty has been an engineer on R&D teams, and so she has some particular war stories here.
Venkat writes, just for fun, math can be nonlinear too.
You know, there's a math where parallel lines eventually meet.
Corey writes, yeah, we in R&D argue with quality all the time. And I think maybe I've given too much emphasis to all caps and exclamation points because now everyone's trying to outdo Stacy. I don't know what's going on. It might be a Halloween phenomenon.
Well, it's just a topic that everybody's so passionate about. The terrible, awful, no good day.
I will tell you this.
R&D thinks the terrible, awful, no good day is whatever quality and RA makes them do. And, and RAQA thinks the terrible, awful, no good day is the things that we didn't do that the FDA comes back and makes us do. And tells us you're no good, you're inadequate, we don't believe this.
Now, where I've seen problems with this is people who are substituting like for like. Of course, you can do that, it happens, but sometimes you're replacing something that has a functional purpose and they're like, but it's the same thing. And I'm like, but is it? Is it gonna flake? Is your new like screw gonna work right? Is the thread count right? Have you done any testing on it? Does it? There's a lot to unpack here because people just make assumptions that a screw is a screw, but a screw is not a screw when it's on a patient contacting device, for example. Like if you change out a material and it's not the same exact screw, it can have an impact on your validations. So
it can sink the Titanic.
Yeah, so there's a lot of times where, you know, when you build something, you don't think about the impacts to your testing, to your validations, to your protocols, because a screw is a screw, but it's not to the FDA.
A reminder to those tuning in, this is why you hire someone like Michelle. And by the way, just to reinforce the super fan favoriteness of Miss Lott, this is the most attended premium meeting we've ever had in nearly a year. We're just 2 weeks shy of a year's worth of broadcasts. So please continue.
So another common mistake we see is clients think that they hit the jackpot with a variety of FDA exemptions. You can have a class 1 and class 2 devices that are 510K exempt. And then you can also have a mix and match of class 1 devices that require GMPs and don't require GMPs. And people who are interpreting these themselves often think that they hit the jackpot, but they misinterpret what the requirements are. And I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is I have a client that is class 1, 510K exempt and GMP exempt. And I told them, that's great, but you still have to have a registration and listing, and so does your contract manufacturer. Even though they're GMP exempt, general controls still apply. You have to have an establishment registration and device listing. He's like, Michelle, you're wrong. that doesn't logically make sense. And I can tell you, Michelle, you're wrong is going to sound expensive later on. And in this particular case, when he was importing his product, Customs stopped it. The FDA put it on hold because his contract manufacturer did not have an establishment registration and listing. And then he's trying to jump through hoops. They're trying to get me to be the US agent. The whole process ended up taking 6 weeks just because there was a lot of logistics to work out with the contract manufacturer and who was going to pay the $5,000 and all these things. And so he ended up, having product on back order, and it was like much more expensive to argue about that. And he misunderstood what his requirements were because his product was so simple. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we've had a client that came to us after she got an untitled letter, a very long untitled letter. And she had a product that was class 2, but it was 510K exempt. And so she thought that because she had this 510K exemption, she didn't have to do anything with the FDA. She did not have a registration listing. She did not have a design history file, even though it was a class 2 product. She did not have purchasing control. She didn't have none of it. And so it's been a very long and expensive process to put all of that in retrospect. So no matter what, even if you hit all the jackpots, you got the class 1, 510K exempt, GMP exempt, establishment registration, device listing, and in terms of a quality management system, you're exempt from almost everything except for complaints and quality records.
Mhm.
Do you have anything to add there, Ty?
I think you put the perfect examples in there. I mean, there's nothing more to really be said except, if you're class 1, you do need to have a quality system. Sometimes people think that because they're class 1, they think that they know what a quality system is and they put something in, but they never do those basic requirements like internal audit or, you know what I mean? So that's another watch out for people. Just because you're class 1, you don't have to do a submission doesn't mean that the FDA is never going to come.
And in terms of a quality management system, if you're not GMP exempt, which there's only a handful of devices that are, if you are class 1 510K exempt, the entire quality system regulation applies to you with the exception of design controls. And there's still 5 categories of class 1 products that do require design controls.
There sure are. I worked on one personally.
Not to let this go to your head, but I'm getting pilloried with, this is the best presentation I've been to in a really long time kind of comments. And yes, this is being recorded. You will get the video and I'll make sure you get the presentation. And it's even easier if you're a member of Premium, I'm just saying. Please continue.
Okay. So moving on through our stages of grief, at the bargaining stage, you need to understand you can't divorce the FDA. This is a non-negotiable. The only way that you can get out of this relationship is by getting out of the medical product business.
So death do you part.
Yes. So this is an arranged marriage. The law requires that you get married to the FDA. And if you even look at the difference in the rings, it will be you investing in the big old diamond to get her to marry you. The first impressions do matter. And I always suggest that you do a pre-submission if you have anything new and novel, just so you get familiar, the FDA gets familiar with you, with your technology. When you go into submission, it's not the first time that you two have met and talked or the first time they've seen your product and your technology. And so, regulatory as a whole is pretty much like that marriage counselor to bring your product into commercialization through that union with the FDA. So the don'ts of this relationship with the FDA. So don't under communicate, meaning don't submit a pre-sub at all when you should have. So you had a new or novel feature, you knew you had a challenging test plan, or you wanted to not test some things that you should have, you didn't get buy-in ahead of time. Don't over communicate. And you would be surprised how many clients I get that by the time they come see me, they have submitted 1, 2, 3 pre-subs thinking that the FDA, they were going to say the same thing over and over. The FDA was going to finally have a different reaction. I even had one client that came to me that had done 2 pre-subs 10 years ago and thought, oh, that's just what the FDA thought 10 years ago. Michelle, tell them the same thing again. And you would think, and the FDA came back and told them the same thing a 3rd time. That's the same thing they told them 10 years ago. And you would think, okay, this is 3 strikes and you're out, or we need to move on. But they were like, oh, we need to do a 4th pre-sub because clearly we didn't explain it correctly.
Also, if you hire a regulatory consultant, don't forget about your pre-subs. Please tell us. It doesn't matter.
Huge document dumps from new clients, and sorting through the documents, I find a pre-sub and I'm like, you didn't tell me that you had already talked to the FDA. They're like, oh yeah, they didn't really say anything meaningful. And then I read the pre-sub and it's like references like 6 guidance documents and other standards and this test plan and a right to reference letter. And I'm like, okay, so this was a year ago. What of this have you done? Where is your documentation? Because again, this is somebody that came to me and like, okay, Michelle, we're ready for you to write a submission. And they had not done one thing the FDA had told them to do.
Yeah, don't hide them.
Your marketing friend is wondering, where did all this art come from?
Oh, you've met Maria. Maria made these. Maria is an artist.
I had no idea.
Yep.
Please continue.
So cover your ears. You know, again, that speaks to what I just said, is people just like, they ask the FDA, then they ignore it. And then, you know, assuming that your competitors brought product to market in a correct way, especially if it's a class 1 device. I see people trying to contrive similarities to their competitors, or assuming that the way that their competitor marketed it, because it's a big name, what was correct, when really it's like the Cinderella's ugly stepsister with the shoe, and they're just trying to shove this thing into an exemption that's not appropriate.
Yep.
Especially of late with Corona and emergency use, I have some clients with very high profile board of director members that are very well connected, and that they think that they can call their buddies in Washington and force the FDA to accept their technology. And it's like dropping the iron curtain. The FDA just shuts down. So clear communication is the key. You know, often the FDA just, it sounds like the teacher on Charlie Brown, and my husband actually came up with this analogy because he overheard a client arguing with me about the interpretation of a regulation. And he said, Michelle, it's like everybody thinks that the regulations are written in English. I read and speak English. I can understand the regulation for myself. But the problem is that the FDA, it just looks and sounds like English, but it's in their own dialect. So words that you logically mean something to you in normal people speak mean and imply an entirely different thing and scope to the FDA. And an example is the word risk. The word risk in the quality management system occurs one time. And it's not even very clear that it's design risk or product risk. It seems like it's more like a process type oriented risk. But if you read the preamble, risk is like about what they mean about risk. And you look about all the guidance documents where they talk about risk, including human factors, which is a subset of risk management. And the recognized consensus standards, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages to say what they meant to say in this one word.
We've
Talk
had a lot.
about job security, Lott.
Oh yeah, some people specialize.
Trade with you. My stuff's more fun, but seriously.
Well, that's another reason why you should hire us, is because this is painful and tedious, but somehow we manage to have fun with it.
Makes the world go round.
Yep. So classic winning strategies I see clients, we're just going to ask for forgiveness instead of ask for permission. And I mean, I see it all the time, particularly in test strategies and justifications. And in my opinion, this asking for forgiveness it's going to delay your submission because they're going to make you do it right and do all the things anyways.
Yeah,
I know this is adding absolutely nothing, but I just love that the head is off to the left just a little bit, and it conveys that it's looking down at this pathetic soul. I can't believe that's just.
This
I
is
added
like,
no value again, but seriously, that's funny.
well, and what's funny about it, I'm from the South, and so this is like a total bless their
Bless
heart.
your heart.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, we see a lot of clients that think that they're gonna just slip something under, and then if the worst happens, and the worst always happens, you can't just slip it by, or if you do, it's not gonna end up well for you anyway.
Later on, right, when you have a recall.
Mhm.
Well, and the thing about it is, I'm totally your regulatory strategy, your risk profile, that is yours to own. I will help you to the extent that I can with the decisions that you make that are best for your business. But the problem is every time I've seen somebody with this ask for forgiveness approach, they still expect the same time to commercialization as if they had done the things up front. And what happens is they just end up having to do put their submission on hold to do the things, and then it ends up taking longer in the review.
And they always end up getting shocked when they skimp out on something that has a long lead time, like biocompatibility. We all know it takes like 20 weeks to do. And then they're sitting there and their submission's on hold because they have to do this long lead time testing. And it's just eats an overhead cost.
You made one heck of a first hire, and I'm looking at Ty's youth and thinking, when she's my age, she's going to be the Michelle of her generation.
When she's my age, I'm hoping that she's the Michelle of her generation. I'm raising her to be.
Please continue.
So moving on into depression. So all of those stages of grief that we've been through so far can ultimately be boiled down to bad design control. So all the R&D people that piped up before, this would be a good time to chime in again. So I have a lot of startups and inventors come to me and say, I have a patent, we're ready to go to market. Well, a patent does not a design control system make. Design controls is a very tedious, detail-oriented process, beginning with clearly articulating your user needs before you even start the design of the product. And then most often I see clients have designed and prototyped a product and didn't even define their user needs.
Yeah. And what always gets me about this with an engineering background is that they're like, here's my design in this patent. And you look at patent drawings and they have a completely different set of requirements than like an engineering drawing. And so you're like, I can't even tell what all of this is. It's not even on the right formatting.
And I have a client that came to me with a patent, and her patent was so specific that it could not be designed for manufacturing. Right. And unfortunately, this was 7 years ago. It was a mask that was supposed to be one of the first with a clear view center in the middle for communication. And so it had this clear view. It had the mask material on either side. Not only did she specify it had to like be a surgical mask, which has one set of criteria. She specified that it had to be an N95. She specified that it had to have an antiviral, antimicrobial agent. She specified that the beak had to have a particular shape. And she didn't even realize that that's like easy $400,000 to $500,000 of testing combined to bring that to market with the FDA, and the shape that was prescribed in her patent. To this day, they haven't been able to get that particular shape. And had any of this had a user needs and a design input analysis done, the patent could have been written in so many other ways to protect her technology in a better way.
And this is
even though she's apparently on her mobile phone today, because she's
yes.
the patent detective. And, I always think of you that way now. So when you
Thank
hear
you.
this little story about what Michelle's just said, what can you relate to our?
Oh, so much. I mean, first of all, a patent doesn't give you a right to do anything. It's definitely not a regulatory permission of any kind. It's also not a permission for anything other than to keep your competitors from doing what you're saying in that patent. In addition, a lot of times the goal of the patent and the way to get a patent is you have to do things that are exactly opposite than what you do for an FDA submission. Unless it's a de novo, right? So you in the FDA submission, you say, well, our product, our device is very similar to this competitor's device. And so you should let us, you should give us permission to use it. In patents, you do the exact opposite and you say, our device is very different from our competitor's device. And hence you should give us something for this innovation. And a lot of times the regulatory and IP don't talk to each other. You may make some submissions during the prosecution and in your patent that might come back and bite you during the FDA and vice versa. So it's very important that these two go hand in hand and you're able to argue the opposite things in a way that will not hurt you in either process.
Andrea, you have yet to be a guest, the
Yes.
guest speaker. So I'm asking you to commit to Friday in January, please.
I will. I'm just trying to find the right time. I will.
That's the right time. I'm giving you 2 months notice. Okay, continuing on.
Okay. Don't do the ostrich. Don't ignore new standards. I have seen clients say that this guidance document came out like a month before they were going to go into submission. So therefore, we don't have time to apply it. Don't worry about it. It's so close, the FDA won't expect it. And then get an RTA because they didn't follow the new standard or guidance document. Don't go retro. So using old data to make justifications, I have had clients bring me biocompatibility data from the early 90s that looked like it was typed on a dot matrix printer and it had handwritten notes all over the edges and it was from some other company of a component they were trying to use. And they're like, just make a justification, Michelle, get us through RTA. We'll start biocompatibility testing. We just want the clock ticking. And so their submission ended up going on hold for a very long time because the FDA, once they had this totally inadequate biocompatibility data, like had plenty of time to like turn over all the rocks in the other parts of the submission. And they ended up having to do more testing than the biocompatibility that they made the justification for. So don't use magic tricks. I also see clients making modifications to standards and test methods or trying to say a particular test doesn't apply when it does. And then this is a real picture where names have been redacted for the guilty. Don't destroy evidence. Don't delete stuff that doesn't make you happy, that doesn't meet requirements. I have seen extensive warning letters about products in their transfer to production validation protocols that they did not, they failed a bunch of criteria. So they rewrote their acceptance criteria. And that product ended up killing people in the field.
Mm.
So a lack of design planning. Most people think that design planning is just like a paperwork exercise, almost like an essay, but it's not. It's a way that you very specifically outline the methodology that you're going to bring a particular product, a particular technology to market. The design and the design phases are often overlapping, and the design planning should take place almost all the way up to the end into design transfer.
Mm-hmm.
So another reason why design planning and spending more time up front in design planning and design inputs is that your ability to influence a product's design rapidly decreases the further that you get towards design transfer. And you wouldn't believe how many people we see trying to retrospectively articulate risk, user needs. It's not until they failed something, they don't spend enough time in this planning and input articulation. And it's not until they have problems later in this design output and transfer that they figure out that they have a problem in their design.
And this gets so expensive later. If you don't do enough time in your planning and in making sure that you really are happy with the features, the materials you're choosing, you have a good concrete strategy for manufacture, it just eats and eats and eats away from your budget. I remember I worked on a project who had a manufacturing change midway through our first build, and it was like $60,000 for the tooling change alone. So there's a lot of, it's easy to skip over planning because you think everyone's on the same page and you wrote nothing down and you think you know what your design is, and then you go to build it and you realize it's not practical.
Jorg writes, this is why you need experienced developers in the process.
Yes.
Yep.
And I've just promoted James to panelist. He writes, this makes a great lead into next week's topic, which is, if he comes on real quick, he can
You're welcome, James.
tell us about next week. But in the meanwhile, well, now I've lost him entirely. Please continue.
Okay, and this is another thing that is often done at the last minute, but that should be done almost before you start your risk management file. You have got a planning aspect in risk management, but most importantly, you have a preliminary hazard analysis that is an element of risk management that should inform your design inputs. So at every step of the way, your risk management file should be evolving with your design history file.
Mm-hmm. And this gives me particular heartburn because I had a lot of battles with this because this is living. And when you start getting complaints and you start getting NCRs because you're really making product, you need to update this. If an auditor sees that you did an investigation, said there's no updates to risk management, and it should have been an update, you're gonna get a finding. It's gonna happen. They really hate that. So understand that there's value in making sure your investigations are doing their job to inform your risk management so that you stay in a nice clean book.
So that product I told you.
I was going to have James interject, reintroduce yourself, what you do and what you're going to talk about next week and why this is so relevant.
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is James Carey. I'm with QRA Corp. We design tools to help engineers write clear requirements the first time. So mostly it's going to be Verna Rodriguez presenting next week on design controls. And a big part of that is making sure that when you write the requirements, they're not only correct, but they're properly understood by people later in the process. So everybody who's reading it, from the FDA to anybody else that's working on the project, to other stakeholders involved in the project, that the requirements are written in a way that the language is clear, that it's concise, and the requirements are consistent. So I just messaged Joe because this is a really good kind of dovetail into what we're going to be talking about next week. And also, since Halloween will be over, I won't get to wear my Halloween vest next weekend, so I figured I should take an opportunity to get on camera while I could here. So thanks for that, Joe.
What a waste of money, but thank you for that.
Hey,
Thrift
so
store fine, which makes it even better.
this is how well that these presentations are going to work together. I did not know Verna was going to be the speaker, and I'm working with Verna on 2 projects right now, and she's great.
Look at my little family. I'm so proud of you all.
Okay,
Okay.
so back to the example I gave earlier where I saw the warning letter where it failed a lot of the validation activities, and they just changed the acceptance criteria. When they started having trouble in the field and getting complaints, they never fed those complaints back into their risk management activities, and they never updated their device design as a result of the product failures that were killing people. So Joe, maybe another time we can go through, because I have a whole presentation on that warning letter and all the things that broke in the quality system. That could be a really interesting one to talk about in depth.
If the enthusiasm around today's presentation is an indication, you may have every week.
So that one ends, well, it's a secret. It's apocalyptic, I'll say.
You are probably not mic'd and you had a comment. There we go. Mr. Harris.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my screen dropped out for a moment. Thanks. Michelle and Tianna, I'm speaking here as a representative of the front office, the customer-facing front office. And I'd like to ask and or suggest that a presentation like this, instead of just saying user needs, I think it would be very helpful for the whole design team and many people involved to understand that user needs really, in this context, covers the whole aspect of value proposition of the product that you're busy designing. And my experience has been several times that that really gets just covered over and almost forgotten about. And what happens is, as a result of various design changes and so on, as the product progresses towards the eventual transfer to production, some of the key value proposition attributes are glossed over and or forgotten and or reduced in importance, when in fact they started off as being very, very important. And so it's always my recommendation that that this not happen, because you might end up with a situation where, if you pay close attention to the value proposition, you might end up with a situation where you have to seriously consider a pivot in the design and some of the key features of the product that you're building. So I'd like to get your comments on that, please.
You are absolutely correct, Peter. What I see when clients come to me, especially early stage startups, they come to me here in the design outputs, and they have not done any work in articulating user needs or design inputs. And then when we try to help them retrospectively build something through a trace matrix, they're like putting the outputs in the inputs, and they don't even know what the user wanted in the first place. And so it's
Exactly
very,
right.
it's very rare that I see a company that has done, and in my opinion, the user needs to be a standalone activity that happens before, alongside the initial preliminary hazard analysis. Those two things need to happen before one thing goes on paper about design inputs or design outputs, and 100% before you start tinkering in the garage.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So acceptance, begin with the end in mind. And so, you know, I have not yet had well, no, I just got my first one, and it's one of the ones I'm working with Verna on, where the guy saw some of these videos and he's like, Michelle, I don't want to end up there. So I'm just gonna hire you now. So begin with the end in mind. And it's important to know, management with executive responsibility, you cannot outsource the entirety of manufacturing and other tests. You can outsource the entirety of manufacturing and design and development, but you can never outsource the responsibility. The buck always starts with management with executive responsibility. Even if you have that contract manufacturer who is a full service design and development house, they may even have internal regulatory and quality that helps you as well. You always own those specifications. You always are accountable for the quality of the product on the market. And you always have to have your own set of quality management system procedures. Even though they're redacted in scope, you have to have a method to control your contract manufacturer and everything downstream of you. I see clients who have picked contract manufacturers, maybe because of cost, that don't have quality management systems or aren't registered with the FDA. And then it ends up that they don't want to do all of the activities and controls that it takes to do that. And then again, thinking that, you know, all I have to do is register and list, and they're going to take care of anything else. I've also seen clients get in trouble for that. So market clearance is not the end of the race. Most people think that they're past the finish line when they get their submission, but the work has just started. You're not done. You have to think about your quality management system. These are defined in Good Manufacturing Practices, 21 CFR 820. And this is just the typical documentation pyramid. And it kind of builds from the top down. These set your kind of corporate approach and responsibilities for your quality management system. Your standard operating procedures define your who, what, whens. And then you start getting specific with work instructions, forms, templates, which is the how. And then you got your foundation of your records and your documents, which is essentially the evidence that you fulfilled the requirements of your quality management system, and in turn, the 21 CFR 820. These are the things that the records are the focus of almost all FDA inspections.
I'm going to throw in a pitch here for Sumya's product at SNVIA, because everything that you did, the 510K, the de novo, all that stuff being in the system, now you can do you tell us all the things that you'll need to do, your letters, your.
Yep. So Somya's saying not only does it help on the pre-market side, because it so streamlines the submission process. In post-market, it has all of your information about your product already in there, and a good bit of the quality management system post-market is about change control. And every time you make a design change, sometimes a manufacturing process change, you have to go back and assess that original product documentation and records and say, can I make this change through a letter to file? And if so, you have to write an extensive document assessing that, which his software helps with. Or you have to do a new submission, and his software helps by porting relevant information over from your old submission to your new submission.
I'm putting on the spot. I do not know the answer to this question. Are you so sold on SNVIA that you're not doing any submissions without the software now?
I am doing probably 90% of my submissions in the software. And the reason why I'm not doing them all is some clients are still DIYing it, and they're just old fashioned.
Okay, so anyone who's one of the cool kids will understand that this is the way to go.
Hey, Ty, you're a cool kid.
I'm a cool kid.
What do you
I
think?
work a lot in SNVIA. It's a nice program. It takes a lot of that admin work out. It makes that e-copy for you. It just helps prevent you from being human and making those tiny mistakes that a FDA person can use as an excuse to hold your submission.
Okay, sounds good to me. Please continue.
Did you see that? Maria is so cool.
No, I missed the basketball. If it's like an animation thing, I need you to do it again. Oh,
It's very
it
cute.
didn't fit through the hoop though.
Well, that's
a design flaw.
That's a design flaw. Is it a hoop or a ball issue?
The user need was the ball goes through the hoop.
Mm-hmm. It could be a training issue. Maybe it wasn't.
Moving on.
Mm-hmm. So design, so you have to have that product related documentation in order. This is your design history file. This is essentially like how you developed your product. It's like, and it ends up in like a recipe. So it's like the whole history of how did we refine this recipe that is now our product and has to be reproducible batch after batch after batch. And then your design history record is how did we specifically build this lot of product according to that recipe. So it's up to you. Do you want a marriage made in hell or a marriage made in heaven? I see people saying that the FDA and by in turn me being RAQA are necessary evils. But I say if you're making medical products that are regulated by the FDA, we are a strategic partner and a fundamental building block of your business strategy. And if you treat it as a necessary evil, what does it imply about your business strategy as a medical device manufacturer? And I could get on that soapbox for a while, but we are past time. So do we have any questions? Any last questions?
At the moment, there's stunned silence from the audience.
That was the point of that statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, free time to ask Michelle any question you got, whether she was covering it in the presentation or no. And I'm allowing the silence to continue because on my thank you so much, great presentation, all caps. Because as I told you at the beginning of this call, I'm kind of buying a house right now and Beth is texting me documents that I need to sign and such. So my attention is a little scattered, but I will tell you this. When it was 9 o'clock, which is when she walked in to see the place, I thought to myself, no, I'm enjoying this too much. I'm not going. So you have successfully competed versus me deciding my domicile for the next couple of years. That's impressive.
Surely 20 minutes wouldn't have made the difference in you being homeless or not.
Stacy asks, is there an alternative path for software products?
You still have to go down one of these paths if depending on your intended use. Software is its own ball of wax. And it's very, very much intended use oriented. And it's where the regulatory pathway analysis is super critical to align with your business strategy, because there are 3 or 4 different ways you can configure it, where maybe you'll fall under enforcement discretion, maybe you'll be class 1, maybe you'll be de novo, based off of the configuration of intended uses and what your product does.
Okay. He asks if there's a specific guidance document.
For software?
Yeah.
There's probably a half dozen.
Yeah.
And that's also intended use specific as well.
Okay. At this point, normally I would engage you and get even more questions out, but Beth is like, you've got to fill out this. Okay. So I'm gonna change my hat and go fill out forms and obey my wife, which is kind of my primary role here.
If we did not learn anything today, do you want a marriage made in heaven or a marriage made in hell? So go be in heaven.
Beth is my strategic partner,
That's right.
not a necessary evil.
The right attitude.
Fair enough.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for the participation.
Clyde, thank you too. I'll just say what everyone's writing me. Great presentation. Thank you for being a resource for me to send so many people to.
And thank you both for letting me crash the party and join in on the.
A welcome addition. We needed a little bit of youth and oh.
I still have a spark in my eye, you know, it hasn't been dimmed yet.
She didn't have these yet.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.